those that are here, you know where all these are. I come from humble beginnings. I was born and raised. I grew up on welfare cheese, and I was one of 5. And if anybody slept in a bed with 3 boys and was raised with 3 boys and 2 girls in one room in a 2-bed bath, a house, and I'm a single parent, you know where I'm coming from. So I came from very humble beginnings, but I had a very, very strong and powerful mother. Her name was Dolly Marie Taylor. And as a minister, not a minister, as a trustee of my church, and learned a long time ago, if you continue to repeat the name of someone who's passed on, you never really forget. So if you guys can do me a favor, and my brother a big favor, and repeat with me, Dolly Marie Taylor.
Dolly Marie Taylor.
Dolly Marie Taylor.
Dolly Marie Taylor.
That is my mom, my brother's mom, and that's why we're here. That's why we're here today and do what we do, because of what she did when she grew up. My mom was chairman of the Tri-County Youth Council, Tri-County Development, way back when, Pamela Jones in Craven counties. So she's done what we're doing. So it started way back there for me. I grew up in these cities, in these villages, and I went on to North Carolina A&T, where I got my BS degree. From there, I went to Polytech in Brooklyn, where I got my master's degree. A young kid, and one of 5 kids, the middle kid, the kid that goes out on his own, does everything differently. I was one of the first on that first team that went to the state playoffs with New Bern High School, played football. I caught the only touchdown in that game. We lost to Pine Forest, but I caught that touchdown. So this is all part of my development. So I have to bring you back to my journey. And I went from there, from college. I went up to New Jersey, worked for the Army, Corps of Engineers for years, developed weapons systems. I built things all over and blew things up all over the world. Did that for 14 years. Moved from there, got married to my lovely wife. I now live in Virginia, been there for over 26 years, got 3 kids. I started building ships. Actually, when I walked into the plant, I started building boats because I didn't know. It didn't dawn on me you can't call a ship a boat until I looked at an aircraft carrier. An aircraft carrier, I have anywhere between 8,000 to 10,000 people on it, and it can stay out in the sea for over 9 months without coming to shore. That's not a boat. You can't fish off this thing. By the time you catch the fish, get to the flight deck, the fish is gone or you got blown off. It's not a boat. So they quickly reminded me of that. So I did that for a long time. But in coaching and mentoring my young people that I work with, I keep developing my skills of understanding how life is and the things that we go through. I was blessed with an opportunity to live in an area of Virginia that's very similar to this area demographically. It's right on the coast. Newport News is right on the edge of the James River, where it goes before it goes out into the ocean. And that's another point. So put a pin in that statement. And then deal with that, there's an area of Newport News which is called the East End that resembles Trincourt and Craven Terrace. So for those of that that lived in this area for a long time, you know how and why Trincourt and Craven Terrace was developed back in the 50s. It was for us, people of the well-tanned from our population. So in dealing with that and understanding and working with the kids from down there, I understand the issues and developments that they were going through as far as opportunities. And being from that area, I was able to relate. So I'm sorry, I'm taking you somewhere with this conversation. So I'm building that understanding of my beginning and my journey. So in doing this, I was counseling people and counseling kids and counseling parents on how to be a parent. I've got 30 plus years on my second marriage. My first marriage, and God help it, we used to say it was my practice wife, but she taught me a lot. When she left, but she taught me a lot. We can talk about that too. But it humbled me to get 30 plus years right now out of my second marriage. To God be the glory for that. And so I counsel a lot and talking to people about what they're going through, what they're going to get through, and then introduce them to, because like my brother, who's a counselor, was an alderman. I'm a commissioner for the city of Newport News, and been a commissioner for 15 years. I'm a commissioner of city planning and development. So I look at the infrastructure, how we develop the property, how we build things and how we put and where we put things like golf courses and where we put new operations, new buildings, police stations, annexations, where we put these things as it relates to the demographics of the people that are in those areas. So I look at that. And I'm one of those guys like my brother that can talk and will talk up and speak up. So I have a different way of approaching it because, you know, you get more with honey than a club. So I have a way of presenting it differently, but we still do the same thing. So we've learned that from our mother to do that and continue to do that. So in doing this, I'm coaching, and we just won our championship the year before. So my brother he calls me up periodically when he does these events. He does stuff in the big field for the kids back to school programs. And I come down with my dog Ram, who just hit 300,000 miles just last week. And I'm gonna tell you, old 2 Dodge Ram. Same drivetrain, same everything else. 300,000 miles. Some of you guys get that, but you know what I'm talking about. Dodges ain't supposed to be that way. Mine is. So we run down here and bring stuff for the kids and get stuff to the kids. So my brother was doing this screening for prostate cancer. So like with everything else, I said, okay, I'll do it. So I'm checking people, and I know everybody from the neighborhood. I know people from New Bern, and everybody was coming through. And I called my wife up. He said, "Baby, have I been checked for prostate?" Like my brother was saying earlier, your wife tell you stuff that you don't know and encourage you to do things that you don't want to do. But more importantly, they have information that you may have forgotten. So I called her, and she said, "No, you haven't been checked. You haven't been screened." So I said, "What the heck? I'm a year. Go ahead and take my blood." And I'm also O negative, so I said, "If nothing else, you can use it for somebody." So she took my blood. I go back to work. Actually, I ended up in Puget Sound, Seattle, Washington. That's where our ships go now. One of our West Coast locations. So I'm out there, and my wife tells me, "You got a letter from New Bern." I said, "Okay," because you know New Bern, that's where we did the event. So I come back home. The letter said Michael Taylor. I open it up, and it says, "Mr. Jones, we have reviewed your results from your blood work. We encourage you to go see your urologist." I said, "Okay, Mr. Jones, I'm Michael Taylor. This ain't me." So I took the letter and I sat it aside. And between the time I got the letter, we were celebrating cancer awareness at our church. And I'm sitting in the back as a trustee. And they asked anyone that's gone through cancer to stand up. Now we have a church of over 2,500 people. Any given Sunday we have about 500, 600 people in the church. So all the men stood up. Lots of men stood up. Lots of guys that I didn't even know could have had cancer, or had cancer, or been through cancer, stood up. So I'm sitting back there with my wife, and I'm looking at this, and my kids. I'm saying, "Oh my God, I didn't know so and so and so and so." So then I said, "I'm gonna do something about this." So my wife, she pushes me to get checked up once a year, so it's coming up on that time. So I went to my doctor. I said, "Doc, I got this letter, and it ain't addressed to me, but I want you to check my PSA, because it's my time." So you check my PSA, and a couple of days later, he called me, and I'm coaching, and I'm running up and down the court with kids and working at high school. Mind him a full-time engineer at the same time, so he was like fitting all that in. But anyway, that's my life. So I'm running. He called me and said, "Mike, I need you to come see me. And bring your wife." Now, the good Lord's will in November, I hit 60. So this is, I was 52. So I do most of my stuff. I'm a man. I don't need to bring my wife nowhere. You know, I'm a man, right? Listen to what I'm saying. Us men, I'm a man. This is my area. And for you women, I apologize that to say this. This is going to be a very transparent conversation. I don't, like my brother, we don't mix words. But I'm an engineer, got clearances, and I understand some things I don't say unless you have a need to know, and I have a reason to. If you don't have a need to know, I have another way of dealing with that. But you have a need to know this. So I'm being very transparent. This is mine. I loaned it to my wife, but this is mine. So my doctor called me and he said, "Want to talk about me? This is mine." And he said, "No, bring your wife." So he brought me and my wife go up in here, and this is back in the room. Now, mind you, the appointment was on maybe Friday. This was Friday from the previous week. So I had this whole week to think about what he's calling me in there for. But I know what I did. So I said, nah, I can't be. I'm great. And all the time, I'm great. He brought me in, and we sat there, my wife and me. And the doctor sitting in front of you. You know how they sit in front of you on their chair? So they sit in front of you. And he says, Mike, it came out positive. No, he said, Mike, your PS levels are very high. Very, very high. So I need you to go get a biopsy done. So I said, what does that mean, doc? He said, we don't know for sure, but we need to get a biopsy done. And so we need you to go do that. And I apologize, I skipped. So that was my single visit by myself. So I went and got my biopsy done. And this is how it starts to get real graphic, because men, you learn not to look at stirrups a different way when you get a biopsy done. When I get a biopsy, I'm a coach, and this is what hit me. This is the first thing that knocked me down and humbled me. I walk in there, and it's just you, this table, in a nice low-lit room, and the doctor said, I need to take your strip down to your shorts. Actually, I need to take your shorts off too and put this thing on. So I start doing that, and I'm behind the curtain, I get dressed, and I come out, and the nurse is coming in, and I come out from behind the thing, and I walk out, and she said, hey, Coach Taylor. I said, what? She said, hey, Coach Taylor. And I said, I turned around, went back and did this. I said, hold up, who are you? She said, I'm so-and-so's mom. You coach my son, and you're coaching him. I'm like, oh my God. So here I am, and the stirrups are still sitting there in front of me, and I know what I gotta get ready to do. So I said, oh no. So she came and she said, look, I'm not gonna lose my job behind this, so don't worry. But she had to do this. So I get up in the stirrups, and I take, they said they're gonna take 12 samples. And correct me if I'm wrong, Doc, but I think it was 12 because it hurt. And he counted them. So if anybody's not done it, it's the beginning of the humbleness. All right? Yeah. So I got through the 12, and then the doctor called me and my wife in, and he said, Mr. Taylor, about a week later, he said, came back positive. 7 out of 12 are positive for cancer. And then he turned to my wife. He literally sat in his chair with the two of us sitting there, and he turned like this to my wife. He said, Michael hasn't heard nothing else from me, and he's not going to hear anything else from me since I said that C word. So I need to talk to you, because he's processing all this other stuff. And my mind went everywhere. From the time he told me I had cancer, it went down the road, up the street, around the block, and how did I get there? So we went through this, and then he came back and he says, the next time he brought me in, he said, when you come, get a chance, come. I want you to come back in a week, and we can talk about the options. So when he came back, we came back in a week. I went home and I prayed a lot. And to God be my glory, he gave me the strength because of my mentoring and my conversations with other people. I said, how can I stay down here when I know God is only giving me another test? Because I have a test and a testimony that I need to share. So that's one of the reasons I came when my brother calls. But he brought me back, and he came back and he started laying out options. And I'm an engineer. I'm a true engineer. I'm an anal person. I go to shop in Walmart, I go up one aisle, come down the other aisle, go up the other aisle. My wife hates it. I said, but if you don't give me the grocery list, then you're gonna shop the way I shop. Because that's why I'm gonna go up and down, up and down, and up and down until I get out the door. I ain't going from here to get no toilet paper, and I ain't going here to get no pork chops. I'm gonna get them up and down, and then I'm gone. I'm just that structured, I'm just that anal. So when he told me options, I'm like, radiation, pills, pellets, freezing, all these other options he was giving me, and he was going through them. And I'm like, all right, I'm writing them down as fast as I can. So I get back home and I call my friend up. Most of you guys know this friend of mine. He's called Google. I call him Mr. Google. And me and Mr. Google spent hours on our conversation for about 3 weeks. doing my research. One thing I found out, and I'm not gonna cut this short. One thing I found out, but like my brother, I can talk. Anyway, one thing I found out is that in the 757, which is the area code I live in, we have one of the highest populations of prostate cancers in the nation. That is one of the reasons why we have the proton therapy center in 757 area code. But more importantly, as an engineer, I started looking at that thing. I've been building ships for 14 years. One thing that's unique about the ships that I build and submarines, they all have nuclear reactors. And as a safety manager, I understand that. But with that, sir, every safety manager, every engineer, every reactor has a safety component to it. You can only give out so many rads, which is radiation levels of, I'm not going to go into all of it, but rads per vessel. So even when you're standing next to an aircraft carrier, it's giving out some radiation, but at a safe level, right? But if you go, and anyone right to this day, if you go to Newport News or go to Norfolk right now, drive there for me on 17, you come across 664. You can look to the right. We've got at least 3 to 4 aircraft carriers and 5 to 6 submarines sitting at the docks right now. That's just one base, right? Base I work up, we got 4 right there and 2 aircraft carriers. And then we got one nuclear power plant in the same area. So I started adding this stuff up. I said, this has got to have something to do with this. Because even when you put one that's at an acceptable level, you tell another that's at an acceptable level, then another that's at an acceptable level, then you got a community that's sitting right outside of there that's getting all this. So I said, this has got to have something. This is just me engineer thinking. So I got this. So I said, oh no. So how do I deal with this, doc? He said, well, you got these are your options. So I said, no, there's another one. Just like a commercial. He said, well, what about this thing called proton therapy? And he said, proton therapy? He said, where did you get that from? I said, Mr. Google. He said, it's right here in Hampton. There's a full facility right there in Hampton that does this. And he said, no, the best way to go is through radiation. We're gonna heat you up and cook your privates and all this around you because you're gonna get your cancer. Now, I'm sorry I'm not sorry, I just told you. I won't be graphic and I'll be exact. That's where it's located. And I said, no. So, I went there and I said, well, prostate cancer is laser. And as an engineer, I know laser beams are very direct. They don't bounce. They go where they gotta go. So, I went and did some more exploration and found out why not. It's an exploratory process that works. Now, I'm not here to pump on prostate cancer and using the proton therapy, but it works and it works for me. So with my journey, I went there, we painted them, as a laser beam, you paint the target. Basically you go in and I put a black dot on that cancer cell. I put a black dot on that one. So when the laser's shot, the laser don't bounce all around, it goes to that point. 6 years in June, I've been celebrating cancer-free for 6 years. And that's my journey to get where I am today because of what I found in the research that I've done. But more importantly, guys, don't forget those small signs that I didn't realize. Incontinence. When you get up and you go to pee and you can't finish, you think you finished, you take a step and you gotta go back. That's something going on with your prostate. All right? That's something to ask about. Over 40, at least get your PSA, start getting your PSA checked. But my journey was one of ignorance and 2 of educational. And I share it as much as I can. And I'll leave you with this. I wear pink, it's Pink Thursday. I will always have something pink on. But in addition to that, we have to communicate this issue. We have to talk to each other. And internally to your families, we have to talk. Because I found out something when I was going through my prostate cancer situation that I did not know. My brother had prostate cancer. That's my blood brother. We shared cheese, real cheese, peanut butter, welfare, everything. We grew up together. He had prostate cancer. He dealt with it. My mom dealt with it with him, but no one told me. Right? The same time I got cancer, my sister had breast cancer. We found she had breast cancer. So I'm telling you, we grew up in the same house. So if there's more of you in the same house, the likelihood of 3 of you getting it, somebody needs to talk. So I tell you, we need to talk as a community. 757 may be the hot spot in the nation, but it's trickling down now. You got the same water route, we're on the same coastline, that radiation is still here. Prostate cancer is something we need to work on. We can eradicate it. We just gotta work together. And I know I had to set the tone, so I hope I did. Okay, guys, have a great day.
All right, real quick, very quick question to Mr. Taylor. Proton therapy. How many sessions did you have to go through?
Well, when I did my proton therapy,
How many questions?
okay,
How many? 28, 30?
28. I did 28 straight sessions.
Now, how were you able to still go to work?
Yeah, the way I structured mine was I did my therapy in the afternoon. I went to work at 6 o'clock, and by the time my day was over, I got my treatments and went home.
So it basically didn't affect your day-to-day activity?
No, you can structure, because of the way it's done, you can get it done that way. The side effects come, which is what I'm dealing with now, come much later. And one of the side effects is ED, and a lack of sperm. You stop producing, or your sperm production is reduced, at least in my case. So I'm still dealing with it. So.
Well, thank you, sir. That's why I'm saying I asked those questions so y'all can really understand what proton therapy is and what it does and what it affects and where it targets at. And doctor, what we're going to do now is we got an hour, so we want to try to get a lot of things in. Recently, in the last 6 months, I say, Tom, Senator Tom Tillis has been diagnosed with prostate cancer, and since then he has been an advocate for prostate cancer. We reached out to him to attend our meeting. He has previous engagements, so he did send a video of him speaking on prostate cancer. So Mr. Tom Reed's going to show a short video on Senator Tillis at this time.
Hi, I'm Tom Tillis, Senator from our great state of North Carolina. It's an honor to join the Prostate Cancer Support Group. It's important to educate men and their caregivers on prostate cancer, how to catch it early, and hopefully beat it. Roughly 3.5 million men in the United States are living with prostate cancer diagnosis, but it's considered to be one of the most treatable forms of cancer. As you know, I was recently diagnosed with prostate cancer. The moment I found out, I was determined to beat it. I chose to have surgery, reducing the chance of the cancer spreading. And I'm lucky because I caught mine early through a routine checkup. These checkups save lives, and I encourage everyone here to join me in spreading the word about the importance of making a PSA test a regular part of their healthcare plan. I hope that we continue to see advancements in prostate cancer treatment and cures, but until then, it's important to take care of yourself.
All right, well, thank you very much. Thank you, Tom. That's not Tom's brother. You got George 1, George 2, that's Tom 2. I'm full of jokes, but I want to make sure we stay focused on what we're here for prostate cancer information, proton therapy. But we're going to keep moving on. If you have any questions, this is a support group. So if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to ask the questions. I will stay here as long as possible. If the individuals that's working have to be, go leave, we understand that, but we want to thank you all for showing up. So we don't want to leave somebody out, like I said earlier. So we're going to move right along here to the next one. We have the individual here, Dr. Seth Miller, a very good friend of mine. And he's been very, very supportive of our prostate cancer support group. As you see on our mission statement, all health normally everyone in our meetings we have a specialist that come out, whether it's Ms. Teresa over there from the Y with different types of nutritionists, oncologists, radiologists, urologists. They come out and give information. At this time, we're going to ask Dr. Miller, and if you have any questions about proton therapy, he's the specialist to answer any questions that you have. He's from Carolina East. Thank you.
So I first want to thank Michael for his experience, right? As the physician, I think many times what we're learning as the science advances is that patient-reported outcomes matter a lot. And so that's what's your experience, what's your personal endeavor been, and how do you look at those across the population? That's really how we can glean the effectiveness of treatment and the cost of it, right? Because as a patient, what matters to you is whether we're successful in the truest form, that we've cured the cancer, but we've also minimized the symptoms or the side effects, both in the short term during treatment, many of which recover, and in the long term, which you're dealing with 1 in 5 and 15 years later. Prostate cancer isn't like some other cancers where there's a lot of quick answers to whether we've been successful or not. Many of you, if you've had treatment, have had treatment months or years or decades ago, and the side effects that can come 5, 10, 15 years later can make a big impact on your quality of life and how you're functioning. So I don't have any formal slides or presentation. I'm happy to tackle any questions that have come up so far or things that you'd be curious to address.
I have a question, Doc. I'm gonna get it started, so I need you all to engage in it. As my brother said, there's research that's going on proton therapy, but there's different cities that it's available and certain cities that it's not available. Do you have a number or name of cities or counties or states that it is available in at this time?
That's a great question. So currently, the last data I looked at, there are 38 proton centers in the country. There's probably hundreds, if not thousands, of photon centers. So the big difference is that a photon is a high energy particle. It's what we use to obtain a chest x-ray or a CAT scan. Most radiation that's delivered throughout the country for all cancers is photon-based. Protons are a charged particle, so we have the ability to control the depth at which they're delivered. Protons really became very popular in the pediatric population. We sometimes have to treat what's called craniospinal, treat the brain and the spine, and there's not as much exit dose through the rest of the body, so we can better protect the other organs. One of the challenges that has occurred in prostate cancer with proton therapy is establishing whether it's truly more effective in the sense of protecting. Your bladder and your rectum are still really close to your prostate, whether you're giving photons or whether you're giving protons. And so there's been challenges on, is this truly a more effective treatment or not? And there have been some patient experiences that clearly say yes. You know, and the hard part is we don't have 2 Michael Taylors to give 1 photons and give 1 protons, so you have some individual differences there. The closest centers to us currently are Atlanta. Emory has a proton facility. Hampton Roads is probably the next closest. There are a bunch along the East Coast otherwise. Duke and UNC were both in talks of either doing a collaborative center or they're separate proton facilities on their campuses, and I haven't heard the latest on that. I think they were in the process of starting to build. That process takes a few years. And so if you were recently diagnosed and you want to explore the option of protons, it would require some travel and would require relocating temporarily while you had that treatment as well.
I'll introduce this young lady here. This is Veronica Carlisle. She's with the UNC Lineberger Cancer. She might be able to enlighten a little bit on, do you know anything about that coming together on doing it at the Durham? I heard about Durham and Chapel Hill events a few years ago.
I don't have any updates on it. The latest I've heard is what you mentioned.
Yeah. I don't think they've broken ground on anything. And from groundbreaking, you're probably at least 18 months away. So not quite there yet.
Dr. Miller, given that there isn't the depth of experience as there is with other therapies, when a patient is newly diagnosed and he is trying to make a decision, part of the evaluation that he makes is, what are my chances of suffering side effects that affect my quality of life? And what we've done is, well, in my case, in the case of a lot of the guys, you sit and try to evaluate what therapy is going to have the least lasting effect on me other than getting rid of the cancer. We've accepted, if we have accepted, that all forms of therapy will be equally effective. The rest of it becomes, am I wearing diapers for the rest of my life?
Right.
Will I have ED, etc.? Could you please address
Sure, that's a good
comparative?
point. So what Bill is referring to is, how do you make that decision? You come to the fork in the road. I've been diagnosed with prostate cancer, and you're presented multiple options, which sometimes is worse for the individual patient, because so you're asking me to choose. You know, I personally, I don't ask my plumber for electrical advice. Why are you telling me to pick from these? But the reality is that it would be unethical to offer surgery or radiation if they weren't considered equivocal. Sometimes the conversations will come up on high frequency ultrasound, cryotherapy. Those are routinely less accepted. One of my rules of thumb is if you can't find a U.S. insurance carrier to provide coverage for a form of treatment, that's probably a good marker that it's not a good option. So the vast majority of treatment these days is either prostatectomy, surgical removal, or radiation therapy. In the radiation therapy realm, there are multiple options. There's photon-based radiation therapy, there's proton-based radiation therapy, there's brachytherapy. That's the insertion of radioactive seeds either temporarily or permanently into the prostate. And one of the versions of photon-based radiation therapy that is growing in its popularity because of convenience is what's called stereotactic body radiotherapy, or SBRT. So classically, conventional radiation would be given once a day over the course of 8 to 9 weeks. There are some short versions that are about 5.5 weeks. SBRT is 4 or 5 fractions over the course of 1 to 2 weeks. So it's a much more convenient schedule. It has much less impact on your ability to work or just frankly have the schedule that you normally would have, because otherwise it's a part-time job to come for 9 weeks. And so that has grown in its enthusiasm. So you are laid out all of those treatment options, and then it's a matter of which side effect profile seems more palatable. So when it comes to surgery, the likelihood of incontinence, the likelihood of leaking urine, at least temporarily after surgery, is higher. The likelihood of incontinence with radiation is small, but not zero. Not so much during treatment, but much more likely afterwards. The likelihood of bowel injury, of rectal toxicity, rectal bleeding, pain with bowel movements, frequency of bowels are higher with radiation than they are with surgery. One of the techniques that we've employed locally and is growing across the country as well is something called spacer. It's a gel put in between the prostate and the rectum. We use this because it creates a temporary physical separation between your prostate and rectum. If I looked up between your legs, we're being graphic for a moment, your prostate and your rectum are pretty close to one another. This gel is inserted by the urologist and creates a couple of millimeters of separation, and that's enough in our world. I often tell patients millimeters are like miles in my practice, and so creating that separation reduces the dose to the rectum. We're able to achieve the same dose to the prostate, but better protect the rectum in the long term. And so it's a non-specific answer because it really becomes down to your preference. Some men will sit in front of me and say, the idea of wearing a diaper is a non-starter. I'm not even going to consider surgery further. The idea of rectal bleeding is a non-starter. I don't want to pursue the idea of radiation, and it sort of pairs down. Both treatments have impact on erectile dysfunction. It's true that if you have surgery, you're not going to have ejaculate. When you orgasm, you're not going to produce as much semen. When you have radiation, that will whittle over time and eventually potentially dry out as well. One of my mentors used to say, same feeling, less mess. But the idea being that you're going to have an impact on that sexual function in either path. Some prostate cancer, when receiving radiation, will also have hormone shots, the suppression of testosterone to increase the odds of curing the cancer with radiation treatment. That almost universally has an impact both on your libido, your interest in sex, and your ability to have an erection. It should recover afterwards. I'm certain there are men in this room, as you all get comfortable with one another, will tell you, it doesn't recover the same. It's probably never as good as it was before surgery or radiation. So I say all of that to summarize that it becomes a very personal decision. Some of it matters how old you are. I saw a gentleman in his 50s recently and couldn't decide. I said, listen, if I asked myself if I was 52 and I had a high aggressive prostate cancer like you did, I would have surgery first if I was younger because of the later effects of radiation, for example. If I'm in my 70s and there's growing data that leaking urine is higher as we age, I would be less enthusiastic about surgery. So the short version is, and it's a great question, to really sit down with your doctor and say, these are the things that are important to me, how do we skew between those two paths?
So then what I'm hearing, Dr. Miller, is that there really isn't any usable statistical data, comparative data on incidence of side effects no matter which therapy is chosen?
That's a good question. You're pinning me down, but I like it. So there is better data, but it's controversial. So you'll have data out of the University of North Carolina when Ron Chen was still there that showed those differences I spoke to. Depending on the data set you look at, you'll see differences in how likely there is to be urinary incontinence, urinary symptoms otherwise, frequency, urgency, nighttime urination. But there's not a clear smoking gun that says this is clearly superior from a side effect profile. And those things continue to be studied because the government's going to force us in terms of insurance reimbursement to look at comparative effectiveness to try to find a winner. But I think you're hard pressed to say one's clearly better than the other.
Thank you.
Good question. Please.
When you said about them having erectile dysfunction as one of the side effects, would you then add like I forget the medical technical name for it, so I'll just go to layman's term,
Yeah.
the blue pill.
Oh, sure. So Viagra or Cialis, good question.
So would you prescribe that to help with that, but then also that only helps with the function of it, but not the pituitary gland in terms of the desire and the emotional part of it? Would you then add another pill for that, maybe an antidepressant of some sort?
Good question. So the two arms to it. How do we treat libido after androgen deprivation therapy? That's really hard. Without testosterone, you sort of lack the gasoline in the engine to make the engine go. And how do you treat the actual lack of function, the impotence, the lack of an erection that happens? So there are actually multiple layers of treatment for the impotence part of things. We start with Cialis or Viagra, pills that you can take to help with erections. If those aren't effective, and everyone take a deep breath for a second, there's penile injection therapy, which most men sit there and say, it ain't that important, I'll get another one. It's okay, it's okay. The reality is that the men that I've taken care of who have used that treatment, and the urologists are the ones that help manage it, it is expensive, so sometimes there's a cost barrier, and insurance doesn't typically cover it. They view it as not medically necessary, which we would all disagree. Sexual health is an important part of our lives. But it's also getting over that barrier of doing it. They're very small needles directly injected into the penis can be very effective. Many men are happy with that form of treatment if they can afford it. From there, there's even a more aggressive approach. So some men have had impotence but still have their drive. There's actually a penile prosthesis. There's an implant that a urologist can place, and there's a pump. If you think of Reebok pump shoes from the 90s, there's actually a pump in the groin, and so there's a reservoir of fluid that's placed in the scrotum, and there's a pump, and they actually pump that up, and they have an erection on demand. And so some men, even when they lack libido, they lack interest, will have a pump placed because they have a spouse who's very interested in some intimacy. I will often tell men, and some of you may have sat in the room with me and heard this, I said, this is an opportunity to be creative with your intimacy, right? You don't just have one tool in the toolkit, you gotta think about the other things. Make some dinner, empty the dishwasher a little bit. There's a couple of things that you can do otherwise. But there are some options to treat that. The lack of libido is a really challenging piece of the puzzle, especially if the testosterone remains suppressed. But functionally, there are some ways to address it.
So it sounds like you're saying you can have the functionality of it, one part of it, or you can have the interest, the libido part of it, which comes from emotional chemicals, right? You can have that, but then the functionality part of it couldn't work.
Correct. So you can have, they're really separate entities, so to speak, in the sense that you may have your libido return, but you may not have function. You may have your function return, but your libido is not there. That's less likely.
So
really
it sounds like if you don't have the libido, then the other part may not work if you don't have the libido to kind of like drive the engine.
That's correct. That's correct.
So how do you fix the libido part of it?
There's not an easy solution for that.
Because the libido, me not being a physician, isn't that kind of like chemical?
It is,
Wise?
but it's treatment induced in many cases because it's the hormone shots that suppress the testosterone. And so most men, their testosterone will bounce back after that treatment is finished, but not all men see that recovery, unfortunately. And so if you lack the libido, the function is not likely to follow, unfortunately. And there's not an easy treatment for the lack of libido. There's controversy on whether replacing testosterone after prostate cancer
That was my
treatment
next question.
is appropriate. There's growing data that says in men who have been far enough out from treatment, you could actually give testosterone supplementation, and that may help with energy, with stamina, with muscle mass, and interest.
Okay. And one last thing, I think that also, I don't know if there's any discussion about changing how men look at sex in terms of it being functionality opposed to just close intimacy that can also drive, it's more important in sex than just like the mechanical, movement thingy.
I suspect that's being studied. I'm not familiar with that part of the